when we talk about digital identity, I think this is a huge problem that we need to be aware of. One of the things that I've noticed over the last few years is as the number of identity management providers has grown, this idea that we can just keep attaching context to someone's digital identity is taking off. It's like, oh, well, think of it like role-based access control on the Jekyll and Hyde formula. It's like we just keep stuffing context into these people, whether it's, zero trust or role-based access controls or what have you. And we're creating a huge burden because it's very difficult to unwind all of those contexts from people sometimes. And just like we have issues with weird interactions between firewall rules sometimes, what happens when we pile too much context onto a person? And then we start running into issues when there are random interactions that we're not expecting. And there are some applications even where you want a very clear definition of identity and role being completely separated from each other. I mean, we run into situations every day where we have a very specific account that we use to log into a service so that it's capable of being used by multiple people because the application doesn't support the ability for us to assign roles to individual user accounts. So maybe, Tom at gestaltit.com is not the login that we use for the service because it won't allow Tom and Ben to have the roles that we need, but a generic account like, user at gestaltit.com does. The other problem that we run into now, especially, one of the downsides of the pandemic is that there has been a lot of churn in the job market. How do you separate context from people after they have left your company? How do you separate that from their identity if you have one identity store? I mean, yes, the tools are supposed to be able to do that, but how do you guarantee it? I mean, there have been numerous news stories about people who had attached identity or context to their identity for things like Amazon Web Services. And they found out 7 months after the fact that no one had removed that context. And the next thing you know, they're able to go in and destroy a bunch of containers running some very critical services just because nobody bothered to look. So is digital identity something that can scale as we start looking forward into security, as we try to make digital identity more and more important? Or are we going to set ourselves up for failure and an eventual reckoning when we realize that we've done way too much, way too fast, and we have to separate ourselves from this problem?
This is definitely a very loaded issue. Even companies that are trying to solve this, like almost every OEM under the sun uses Salesforce for its partner system. But even with that, now I have 2 different accounts for every single OEM out there. That's someone that tried to be the one provider for a solution. And then, of course, it made the total number of passwords accounts double. And when we think about that, all right, if there's ever an attack that happens to those identity providers, well, we just gave them a storm of information. Like everything in one bucket is not always good. So this definitely is problematic because it goes against the problem they're trying to solve quite often.
There is Decentralized Identity Foundation which is working on that kind of problem. And the idea is that you can have several digital ID on maybe on the social network, on games, on shopping, on the internet, and the idea is to centralize all IDs and to in some kind of digital wallet, and you will be able to manage all authorization from about what data or what kind of data do you accept to share with this with the companies or with the services. And I don't know. I know that Microsoft is working on the decentralized identity, and they already launched a service about that, and they are pretty much working with the DIF the Decentralized Identity Foundation about that. So I don't know if you already are working on it. For myself, I'm working on it with a blockchain concept in order to to decentralize the identification and to have some kind of SSO experience for the user in order to facilitate the end user's life, but not not by creating some leaks security, some lack of security. So,
well, the problem when one major company gets on board with something like that is everyone else does. Oh, we're going to do that as well. So that's why we see login from Facebook, Google, Twitter, all as different options to many different websites who are trying to have one single identity system. So none of the big companies will want to look like they were one-upped by one of their competitors in this identification front.
And I would argue that one of the problems we run into when we are relying on these third-party authentication systems to do that, whether it's Google or Apple or Facebook, is that when we try to separate that part of the digital identity from everything else, we run into massive issues. What happens when someone who has been using Google sign-in is unavailable? I mean, I have a very tight security on my Google account. And if I use Google to log into a service and I need to be able to log into that service from somewhere where my security won't work for some reason, I mean, I'm kind of stuck. And how do I fix that problem? Or how do I move that service? What if I need to use a different account or something? Or worse yet, this is a problem we've seen with Amazon Web Services. People will just use their regular Amazon account to log in to manage their servers that they use to order the toilet paper. Well, if someone hacks that, not only do they have the keys to your Amazon kingdom, they have your credit card information too for all of the toilet paper in the world they could ever possibly want to order.
Yeah, and then of course, as those big companies do architectural changes, that's a big issue. Look at what's going on with Google and their G Suite now, or Google Workspaces. Those logins don't work with any of the Google Home products that Google has acquired, like Nest or others. So even one centralized major company has infighting among itself based off of identity for the different products and services that they have.
And that's part of why you're starting to see companies and open source projects that are designed around federating these multiple identity sources. It's been around for years in the higher ed space because you have visiting professors that go from one campus to another, but they still want to be able to use their email and ID from their home campus. So you have to have a way of federating the local authentication with the home campus where they came from. Same with students that go abroad for a semester or two.